This is Father Joseph Anthony Kress.
And this is Father Bonaventure Chapman.
And welcome to Godsplaining. Please like, comment, and subscribe on this issue and share it with those that you would think would enjoy it. And if you feel so moved to do so, please support us on our Patreon. Links for that will be in the description in the show notes for this episode. Now, Father Bonaventure, we are talking about a fun little, and it's very kind of recent, a fun little topic that is the latest encyclical of the Holy Father that is on the Sacred Heart of Jesus.
Yeah, Dilexit Nos.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, we've done a number of episodes talking about different encyclicals and things like that, and about what is an encyclical and the very nature of it. But let's just kind of reflect on our own kind of personal engagements with encyclicals.
Sure.
So I want to hear two things. What is the first encyclical that you remember reading or encountering or whatever that may be? And then what is your favorite encyclical? Maybe the one that you keep going back to. They may be the same one, they may not be. I'm hoping for two different ones.
Well, I'm trying to think.
The
first one I knew about, obviously I didn't see this one when it came out, but Humanae Vitae.
Oh, okay.
That was probably the first one because as a Protestant, you hear rumors about this thing and about like the Catholic Church, and I was always very inclined to the Catholic Church teaching on sexual teaching and such, and so they kind of holding the line, you could say. And so I remember in college, I think it was college when I read Humanae Vitae, and was impressed. It's a short encyclical. It's not very long. No. It's not like JP2's, and the current encyclicals, you could say. Yeah, exactly. But that's the first one I think I read. But the first and my favorite one, Deus Caritas Est is fantastic. I do love Veritas Splendor. Oh yeah, that's great. It's a book.
It is,
you know? So it's really
it's not
long.
A letter or anything like that.
Dives et Misericordia is really good too.
Oh, yeah.
Dives et Misericordia. But I think, what is it? Rerum Novarum's good. Yeah, I think it's probably Veritas Splendor.
Okay.
I think that's a great encyclical. Yeah. You? What was your first and your favorite?
Okay, my first encyclical that I remember like actually reading probably was Deus Caritas Est. And I remember I was in high school and there was like rumors that the Holy Father was going to drop that encyclical at like noon Rome time. And I remember like getting up in the morning and like downloading it and like printing it off at like 6 a.m.
That's great.
And then started working through it. And it was really cool. Like, it's, and not only was that like, that was kind of my first, like, oh, there's this kind of thing magisterial teaching that's kind of new cool, and everybody's experiencing it for the, like, my experience of the magisterium was like all this ancient stuff that had already been done, but like, hey, here's a new addition to the magisterium. Let's all figure that out together. So that was a really cool experience. And then on top of that, it was Deus Caritas Est. Like it was a behemoth. Like it was such a beautiful encyclical to begin with. Yeah. So to be introduced into the world of encyclicals with that one, I think was really, really cool. But I think probably my favorite, the one that I can go back to time and time again and always just be gobsmacked and just really overwhelmed with it, I think is going to be Redemptor Hominis.
Oh, nice.
It's just... It's kind of basic, but it's also just, I can never get enough of the foundational things. Yeah. And so it's one of those ones that I just find that I can continually go back to and get new things. And it can speak to every age that I read it in. Yeah. You know?
I guess I should say Fides et Ratio is spectacular too. That might be as a philosopher, I suppose that's supposed to be my favorite one. Yeah. And Veritas Splendor is moral theology and moral philosophy too. So
yeah, they're both in there.
Yeah.
So, okay, now we've talked a little bit about the world of encyclicals and its kind of rich patrimony. And that means the one that we've just received from the Holy Father, Pope Francis, enters into that and is a new addition to this kind of library of the magisterial teachings. So give us a real kind of postcard version of what this new encyclical is, and then we're going to break it down in its structure and what it's speaking about.
And actually, I really like this encyclical. Yeah, I really like this encyclical. I mean, so Pope Francis, obviously known for being a little bit controversial in some aspects, especially his magisterial teachings and things. But here he seems to hearken to part of him that you see often. He's a world, but he has this devotional tendency. Early on in his papacy, he was encouraging those to not look down on simple devotions, encouraging people to actually take up simple devotions, rosary again. So he has this kind of popular piety aspect to him as well. And this encyclical is a kind of popular piety encyclical. You say it's about the Sacred Heart, and in deep, sophisticated ways, not only in the devotional aspects, but also in the kind of philosophical and theological aspects, and has actually a good kind of history of the saints. Even talks a lot about the individual saints. So it's a rich encyclical. It's not too long, so it's reasonable. It's not massive, but it's also not too short. So it's got a lot going on in there. Basically, what he's got structured, or at least as I read it, he has a discussion first about the heart, and then about the Sacred Heart. So he's moving you towards this devotion aspect sort of thing. So he talks about, say, human anthropology of the heart, and then he talks about the Sacred Heart, gets you onto the devotion, and then he talks about his desires for two aspects of this devotion to be taken up. One, a kind of personal spiritual experience, he says, and then the second one is a sort of communal missionary experience or commitment, he says. So you have this kind of, but the big focus, I should say, is to make the heart, again, an important aspect of our relationship with the Lord and with each other. So the two love command now kind of embodied or incarnated in the heart, which is it's just a nice emphasis, especially Dominicans who are not inclined particularly to focus on the heart. And I love the heart. Do a lot of work with pietism and such, and the heart's this kind of has massive importance there. So this might end up being my new favorite encyclical, but I liked it. I really liked it a lot.
Yeah, no, I think those are some fun things to kind of like poke at, and I think you're absolutely right. Like, one of the kind of, not saying that the previous Holy Fathers didn't address pietistic or simple devotions, because they all did,
Sure.
John Paul II wrote the rosary,
yeah.
Things like that. But I think there's a certain freshness when you hear the sitting Holy Father write on, pious practices and devotions. And Pope Francis does a beautiful job of that. And I think can really speak into both his own experience, his own personal devotion. You can see that he's very devoted himself to the Sacred Heart and how that kind of overflows into this writing, but also leading the faithful in that way. And like I said, to me, there was a certain kind of freshness of, I don't want to say taking away the gravity. That might be too much, but sometimes we get these things and it's like, oh, this is super important. It's like, hey, but let's not forget, these devotions and this prayer should be part of a regular life. And there's like I said, I don't want to say that this isn't important, because it is, but it kind of has this freshness and kind of levity to it, maybe, in that sense. And I really, really enjoyed that. But also the hilarity of it is the fact that you have two Dominicans, which, stereotypically are just, all about brains, and that the gap between the head and the heart, the Dominicans are going to lean into the head side of things. But here's something that was radically important. And we're discussing the beauty of the heart.
When I was also surprised to hear I'd heard this before, but I didn't know it, really see it in writing. That the Sacred Heart is an important devotion for the Jesuits.
Yes.
This had an historical relationship there with, Margaret Mary Alacoque and all the spiritual directors and such. The Jesuits have a great devotion to this, but there is a section, just to take a little side digression, I suppose, a section on the Jesuit history. He breaks out, because he's a Jesuit, of course. And so he breaks out and talks a little about the Jesuits' experience of the Sacred Heart. And I think that's in a campaign, or it could be seen as a campaign, to reorder and remind people about the Jesuits, what they're really about, and they have a spiritual, mystical side to them. And this is true for Ignatius. He talks about this kind of desire for the inflamed heart and all of this, and Ignatius's mysticism here.
Oh my gosh!
But also Saint Francis Xavier has that beautiful image of him having to open up his cassock because his heart is so on fire for souls, and when in his missionary work. So the Sacred Heart, as a Jesuit kind of devotion, the way that the Rosary is a kind of Dominican devotion. Of course, it's open to, and the Scapular is a Carmelite devotion.
Sure.
Of course, they're open to, other than Nativity set, as a Franciscan devotion. You can all do it, but I hadn't thought of the Sacred Heart as being a particularly Jesuit devotion. But this was a nice reminder that the orders themselves also have not only the intellectual components and emphases, but also have these devotional kind of spiritual aspects to them. And so that gave me a greater appreciation for the Jesuits under the aspect of the Sacred Heart too.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's dive into it.
Okay.
As you kind of, in the postcard, kind of broke down the structure of the encyclical and some of his major points and things like that. So let's kind of address those as we can. He talks about the heart. That's what he begins with. What is the heart? And what does that look like? Why is it important to speak of the heart in our society and our experiences? So how does he address that?
Yeah, well, and the heart is tricky to talk about, of course. I remember reading a book so Dietrich von Hildebrand wrote a short book called The Heart. It's 119 pages or something. And it's a reflection on the Sacred Heart of Jesus, of course. It might be worth taking up and reading again at this point. And I always loved that book because of the heart, but he says like the heart's a third faculty, it's third power sort of thing. And I never know what to do. It's a bit like beauty, like the heart and beauty. I think the heart and beauty are so important, and I don't know what to say about them really, like analytically. But he does give, this is nice actually, is Francis gives a kind of sense of the heart as, you see, this a synthesizer and a unifier. And both on the level of the individual, but also on the level of the community. In the individual, he has the sense that the heart is the unifier, synthesizer of our rationality, our reason, and our instincts, impulses, you could say our animality.
Yeah.
Of course, Aristotle says we're rational animals. So these two aspects where we have an animality to us, but it's informed by our reason. We have these rational souls. And the heart ends up being this kind of midpoint, this unifier of these two aspects of us. Our reason, because it is directs the reason to love, which is for us not just a pure desire, but rather a choice of the will.
Right.
Choose things.
It's an act of will in that.
But
way.
also the instinctual part of us that still has this kind of a heart warmed, like a heartbeat. You know, when you fall in love, your heart starts. I mean, like all the physicality kind of stuff, the physiological dimensions. So the heart and it's the center, and even the center of the body, right? It's above the digestive tract, and it's in the center of the chest, below the head. But it's that brain is an important organ, of course, but the heart is also the central organ that pumps and feeds everything else. So you have not only like a biological unifying feature to it, but also the sort of symbolic or philosophical unity of the way of describing how we unite as rational animals in this particular way, which I thought puts a little more analytical heft to the notion of a heart as this unifying of the person.
Yeah, he talks about the kind of unification, but I really appreciate how you kind of like highlight the synthesizing nature of the heart, that like the heart of the person, which I think, from my own kind of personal experience, it takes on that kind of poetic nature. It's like very symbolic. Right. It's like, the heart of an issue, or I feel that in my heart, or those types of things. And it does have that kind of odd relationship to art and beauty and that. Yeah. But there's this, like, when you take that step back, it's like, well, the entirety of who I am is synthesized into my heart, Yes. And so it can be revelatory in that way, where, where my heart is so important. Where I place my heart is not just a figure of speech, but actually synthesizes me as a person. And I think so. Seeing that as both a unifier and this synthesizer is really, really, for me, just helpful to see it that way and to be comfortable speaking of a heart.
Yeah, I think it's one of those. That's one of the power. I suppose that's the power of its vagueness.
Yeah,
and it's like is that it allows this a place for the unity of disparate elements, so that we can say something like, well, where is your heart? Where he says at one point, this startling question, he says, do I have a heart?
Oh, yeah.
And it's worth asking, it's like, do I have a mind? It's like, can I think and this sort of thing? Or do I have feelings? Do people frustrate me, or do I get sad or something? But the heart is more of a thing I have to develop. My mind is just what I've got, and my feelings are like what I have to control. But a heart is something like I could not have a heart. Whereas like not having a mind, not having feelings are different, but not having a heart is, so the heart is not only a center, but it's centering of us, but it's also like a project of us. Like I have to build up a heart, and calling the Pope asking us to reflect on whether we do have hearts and how we build up our hearts, which is to say the unification of our desires, our wills, and our minds towards an other.
Yeah.
Right? In love. It seems like that is just a fantastic image. No wonder that like the Sacred Heart and the heart is so important.
Yeah, I mean, what a damning thing to say of somebody is like, oh, they don't have a heart.
Yeah, they're heartless.
They're heartless. Like we use
unemotional is like semi-neutral. It's like, oh, it'd be too bad if they had emotions. Or like, oh, kind of brainless. It's like, well,
they lack empathy. They can't like
it's
a
moral failing not to have a heart.
But to say something, oh, he doesn't have a heart.
Yeah,
it's like, oh, that's.
Yeah.
So let's okay. So from that understanding of what the heart is and how, God willing, we each have a heart, but what that looks like. How does he shift over, and what does he say about the Sacred Heart, and why is that special?
Well, I like this. So this is a nice transition with the Sacred Heart, because the Sacred Heart is the unifier. He says the unifier of all reality at some point. And I think what he means by that is, one, in the Sacred Heart, you have the unity of not just the sensible kind of animality and then the rational humanity, but in the Sacred Heart, you have also the divine union, right? The hypostatic union of Christ, who is fully man and fully God. And so in the heart of Christ, you have the union of all of creation in a way, the sensible, the human rational, and then the divine. And that's one, the sort of, you could say, metaphysical union or a point, but also the sense of the whole universe is ordered towards this heart of Christ, and because of his salvific work, right?
Yeah.
The aim of the universe is to be in love and desirous in some relationship with God through its own modes. Rocks and toads desire in a particular way that we do. We're supposed to be united with him in love. God is love, Deus caritas est. And so everything is supposed to respond in their capacity of love with him, right? And the Sacred Heart is the heart of Christ, who comes to fix and redeem those who have fallen out of love with him. So it's the unifying aspect, and not only in the sense of like the stacking up the different kinds of layers of being, but also in the sense of bringing back the whole point of the universe, so that the Sacred Heart, as this purest heart, as this image that bleeds for the world, is the direction of where the world is supposed to be going back to. So that as unifier of all reality sounds grandiose and bizarre and poetic, but it's nice to have a concrete image of that. And in the sense that Christ is, of course, the image of God and the kind of the capstone of creation, you could say, the recreation, and that we're all aiming towards him, that he's the reconciler of all things, then his heart is the center of him. Therefore, the heart is the center of it all. I like that.
I mean, it's fascinating to then begin to reflect on this. Like, yes, okay, it's the unifier of all reality and all of creation, but that's in the context of a human heart. Like, this isn't at a distance. This isn't this weird kind of
Platonic other thing.
Yeah, it's the fact that like God did take on a humanity. Like he took on this human reality, but it's precisely in that humanity that all of creation now finds its proper direction, origin, and redemption. Yeah. And in all of the disorder that we experience in this, it's actually oriented into a very human experience, things that we can now understand because we too have a heart, and so seeing it that like this unifier is the heart of Jesus as in his humanity, but that union of the divinity and humanity in this person of Jesus is experienced or shared with us as a gift, but in a heart.
Yeah.
And that's
the heart of the world and the heart of the universe, heart of reality. I like that. I like that notion of the actual concrete. So Hegel introduces this notion of the concrete universal, right? It's the great synthesis on the Aristotelian, the Platonic development of the universal versus the concrete particular. And Hegel has this concrete universal, and Balthasar picks up on this and talks about Christ as the concrete universal. Yeah. And I think even here we have the sense of the Sacred Heart as the concrete universal of God's love. Right? Yeah. This actual heart of him, whatever we mean by that.
And I think, we can talk about the great gift of the incarnation of God becoming man in flesh, but like part of that gift and almost maybe precisely the beauty of that gift is that now we have the Sacred Heart to help understand our own reality, our own redemption, but also the synthesis of all of reality is in the Sacred Heart of Jesus Christ.
Yeah, that's right.
Once again, not at a distant, not a figure from the cosmos, but Jesus Christ, his heart for us. And that places it in a very unique and particular way, which we enter into a relationship with.
Also in the sense that, I mean, the sacred mind, you could say, like the divine mind of Jesus, is just not something I'm ever going to really, I mean, I want to have a mind like Christ in a way, but there's still, but there's something, it's more approachable from the heart aspect, to have a heart like Jesus, because somehow feeling and loving in this particular way is more, it seems more possible than thinking like him. Yeah. And I should say this, that by feeling like him, that might direct some of the thoughts like him too. Yeah. So it's easy to approach that way.
Very, very much so. So, okay, let's talk about then, we talked about what the heart is, or the Holy Father spoke about what the heart is, and then the importance of the Sacred Heart in that light. You know, what's his next step then? Because we talked about how this is a unique kind of devotional encyclical, and so he kind of moves it to
he's encouraging us to. He's encouraging us to do something. A good Jesuit. And so, I mean, before anything, a specific one that caught my eye, I thought, ooh, is this. So often, traditionally, days were associated with particular devotions or votives things. And so Thursday was the day of the Sacred Heart, right? So he has this point of, he says, well, I'm not saying you have to do this, but wouldn't it be nice if everyone did a holy hour to the Sacred Heart on Thursdays? Wouldn't that be nice? And he lets it go. And I thought, ooh, maybe
we could dig that up, dust that off, take it off the shelf a little bit.
But I like that emphasis of particular days focused on, because we still Fridays, of course, we hold the Passion. Saturdays, of course, we hold to Mary.
Blessed Mother.
But Thursday, the Sacred Heart is just kind of, I think, it slipped out. So I'm grateful that he's brought us back to this.
What's it? The month of June or the July is the Sacred Heart?
I have no idea, but I want to find out.
I think it's July.
Okay.
July is the Sacred Heart.
Well, that'd be nice.
June or July, I forget. Yeah. That shows me where I lack my devotion. Maybe I could do better.
Well, no, it's this. I think this is why he's bringing this back, because Sacred Heart is so great. So I'm excited about it. Now, the two things he mentions, though, of course, is the personal spiritual experience stuff, so the personal devotion, and then, of course, the communal missionary commitment. And you might think, oh my gosh, we're going to have a little bit of personal stuff, and then we're going to be basically doing the kind of standard Pope Francis, like social justice kind of stuff or what have you. But it's mostly the personal stuff.
Right.
Like
it's a glancing blow to the corporate side of it all.
And of course, there's a corporate dimension to it.
Yeah.
But maybe this way, we could say the personal stuff is focused on our particular love of Christ and that intimacy. And particularly, this is so clever, so interesting of him, is defending a very, not controversial, but an interesting devotion, the consoling of the Sacred Heart. So he talks about, he goes through this little kind of catechism of the saints and the relationship to the Sacred Heart, and also to this kind of notion of consoling the heart of Christ. And St. Therese of Lisieux plays a huge part of this, has a huge part of this. And so in the personal aspect, he has this notion of trying to reclaim this idea of consoling. And I like it in the way that he puts it, because he wants to fight off people who are cold-hearted, he thinks, or so focused on like the thought. So he says the heart has reasons. This is Blaise Pascal's kind of thing.
Yeah.
He says, look, the consoling thing, you might wonder about this, but there's just a rationality, a reasonableness to the sense that you want to console a friend. You want to join, and not by like fixing. He says, look, you can't fix, you're not doing it. But like when you console someone, you're coming alongside them. And I like this aspect of, if you're dedicated to or attentive to the actual heart of Christ, and especially if you think about it on the cross, right? If you think about Christ's sorrow for the world, or his revelations in Sacred Heart devotions. And Saint Gertrude the Great, I suppose. Was
1000%.
We went to novitiate Saint Gertrude, so that was my first introduction to the Sacred Heart. But that you want to come alongside the heart, and I think I like him just tweaking us and saying, I hear in the background, you Dominicans, are worried about how do you dot all the I's and cross all the T's, the devotions. Just trust the faithful. This was a practice that is gone, and it has this anthropological dimension of actually desiring like him, to sorrow with him over sins, personal sins of other people in the church, sins of the world. There's a sense of consoling, like wanting to do something, desiring, having this movement towards Christ and his heart, which I really like. And that's the kind of the core, you could say, of the spiritual experience, the personal spiritual experience he wants, is to have us reclaim and make and re-rationalize, you could say, and make it reasonable again, this notion of consoling or aiming at the heart of Christ that aims at us.
Yeah, I think the first few times that's always been presented to me is consoling the heart of Christ. It's like, oh, now I have the upper hand on Jesus. Like he's sad, he's weepy, and it's my job to comfort him. And he's gonna when he begins to speak of that, it's like no, it's joining the Sacred Heart of Jesus as he weeps for others, and it's kind of coming alongside of the beloved, not necessarily to fix it, but also to kind of join them. And there's a certain, and I think we all have experienced this in our life, like there's a real kind of sadness and grief when one recognizes that they're alone in their sadness, And so to join the Lord, to come alongside of him, to console the Sacred Heart as the Sacred Heart weeps for the sins and the betrayals of others, is not to, let's say, have the upper hand, but it's to not abandon the Lord, right?
Yeah.
And what a great gift that is to say, no, I'm not going to be like your answer. I'm not going to be the remedy or the solve to the sadness that's there, but it's the remedy is almost the lack of abandonment. So when we come alongside that Sacred Heart, it's not that we have the upper hand on the Lord or anything, as I have a certain authority over the Sacred Heart, but it's that I refuse to abandon him as he weeps and as he is sorrowful, right? And there's a certain kind of, I think, appropriateness to that we've experienced in our own kind of broken humanity of what a sadness it is when we are grieving and we feel as if we're alone in that grief.
Yeah.
Now, we know that the Lord joins us and he never abandons us, but there is kind of a real experience of that, which once again speaks to the appropriateness of the Sacred Heart of Jesus Christ, not just at a distance of a deity.
Well, and that's right. And that's again, this kind of the personal spiritual experience he talks about, this growing closer to Christ in person, this kind of this devotion, not just as a mechanical thing you do, again, but rather as an intimate relationship. And that it seems like he's proposing the Sacred Heart as a reminder that this is a privileged devotion to get close to Christ. In the way the Rosary is a privileged devotion to get close to Mary and see Christ through her aspect. In the same way, so the Sacred Heart is this devotion that pushes us towards Christ in that intimacy, that friendship, which we all desire and which he's calling us towards. The second thing he gets on then is the social, communal aspect.
He kind of gives a glancing blow to it. We should probably follow suit as well.
Well, he talks, and you'd think like, oh, this is going to be a great discussion about social works projects or like things we should do in society. But here, it's very much about forgiveness. It strikes me, and maybe he's preparing the way for the year of hope and such, and the Jubilee year in this way. But he has a sense of, instead of consoling, that's the spiritual one. You have reparation, and so reparation, but not in the sense of like fixing things so much externally, but uniting yourself with others in forgiveness, like seeking to be honest with each other about things and having compunction and wanting to fix things, of course, but really having also this openness and transparency. He has this beautiful, this is in 187 and 188. So this is the kind of social aspect. He says, good intentions are not enough. There has to be an inward desire that finds expression in our outward actions. And I like that it's, you could say good intentions are enough, you have to do stuff.
Right.
But it's not. It's good intentions are enough, you have to have an inward desire. So you have to have a heart that has been, from the consoling aspects, uniting with Christ in this particular way. You now have a heart to do good and to fix things, and that leads to action. He says, reparation, if it is to be Christian, to touch the offended person's heart and not be a simple act of commutative justice, presupposes two demanding things. One, acknowledging our guilt, and two, asking forgiveness. And he says in 188, he says, we should never think that acknowledging our sins before others is somehow demeaning or offensive to our human dignity. On the contrary, it demands that we stop deceiving ourselves and acknowledge our past for what it is, marred by sin, especially those cases when we caused hurt to our brothers and sisters. And so this social communal aspect of the Sacred Heart devotion is realizing that you have hurt others, that you have been cold or heartless, and that you should ask for forgiveness, which seems so simple and silly, but again, as you get older, you start to realize, oh, I'm not going to apologize for this person. This is just how these things go. And, we're done with that kind of stuff.
What good would it really do
But this kind of, the idea that you should never think of acknowledging our sins before others is somehow demeaning or offensive to our human dignity.
Yeah.
That it's okay to say, I'm sorry, I've done wrong in this aspect, not just in communal gestures, we could say, but interpersonal gestures, because you've spent, ideally, I think, time with the heart of Christ, and you've realized that your heart is needing restoration, and he has done that, and therefore it spills over and desires to love those others.
Yeah.
So I love that emphasis of spending time consoling or with the consoling heart of Christ, and then going to make reparation by asking forgiveness first and foremost, and admitting your failings of heart to others.
Yeah, no, I think that is so beautifully said and just laid out for us in that sense that these two things, both consoling and reparations, are actually very, very intimately connected, and they're not kind of sectioned off from each other as like, well, this is a good action to do, I'll just focus on the consoling side. Well, it's actually that moves us to reparations versus this kind of jump. Maybe I want to just jump to reparations and kind of, it's awkward, I want to fix it, I want to jump to reparations. Well, actually that's a fruit or an overflow of spending time in union with the Sacred Heart of Jesus in that consolation. I think that's so beautiful to see them like oriented towards each other, and they're not to be separated. You can't jump over one. You can't have one without the other in a certain sense.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is so he has a communal aspect, but he also has this missional aspect.
Yeah.
And I love this. He has this line near the end there. He says, this is 2:11. Christ asks that you never be ashamed to tell others, with all due discretion and respect, about your friendship with him. He asks that you dare to tell others how good and beautiful it is that you found him. And I like this, that the Sacred Heart, once you develop this relationship, and who doesn't love the heart? I mean, Valentine's Day, like there's, it seems the heart sounds so silly and trite, but at the same point, it's actually the most deep, most fundamental thing. We all want to have hearts. We all want to love in this particular way, this fully integral way we talked about. And to be able to say, like, actually, I found the true aspect of my heart with the Sacred Heart of Christ, and heart, cor ad cor loquitur. Heart speaks to heart, as he quotes Newman, of course, in this, that you naturally want to say to someone else, like, this is a heart that you too can have, both yourself, but because you've had him first. So I like that mission aspect, mission telling others about the intimate relationship that you have with Christ that they could also have. Yeah. That's beautiful.
I think that's fantastic. Beautiful kind of understand, beautiful quote to kind of wrap up this episode on.
I think this is my favorite encyclical. I have to say, I just kind of talked myself. I was feeling pretty comfortable about it, but I think this might be my favorite encyclical.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So thank you all for joining us on this episode, and never be afraid to share your experiences with the heart of Jesus with others. And to do that, one way to do that is to like, comment, and subscribe to our podcast. You can do so on any platform of which you are listening or watching this episode. We also encourage you to check out our website, godsplaining.org, to check out new merchandise that we have, as well as in-person events that we do. We love coming together in person with each other to share our experiences with the heart of Jesus and to share them with each and every one of you. One of those will be our upcoming retreat. It's an all-comers retreat, so any of our listeners are invited to join us on June 20th through the 22nd in Providence, Rhode Island. More information can be found on our website, but the dates of that, once again, are June 20th through the 22nd in Providence, Rhode Island, so we invite you to check that out and see if you're able to make it work and join us in Providence for our upcoming retreat. As always, please check the description and show notes for other links or things that you can help support our podcast. And as always, know of our prayers for you. Please keep praying for us. God bless you.
Father Bonaventure, if you had to choose between getting Warby Parker glasses, subscribing to a YouTube channel, or flossing your teeth, what would you choose?
Oof. I guess, to be honest, subscribing to a YouTube channel.
See, folks, it's not as bad as flossing your teeth or getting Warby Parker glasses. Please subscribe to Godsplaining. Cheers.